Hey everyone, my name's Robinson, and I lead the Wormhole Foundation, focused primarily on product and strategy. For those of you who aren't familiar with Wormhole, we're an interoperability protocol. So we are the infrastructure that connects blockchains. So we enable blockchains to send data between each other. Most people are familiar with data in the form of tokens and NFTs when it comes to sending things cross-chain, but you can also send messages, for instance, and instructions and things like this. Wormhole's been around for about 2 years. We do about 2 million in message volume a day. We're connected to 27 blockchains, and we've helped facilitate about north of 40 billion in asset transfer. And yeah, excited to be here. We work closely with CCTP.
Hey, I'm Philip Zentner. I'm the founder and CEO of LeFi. LeFi offers a smart order routing across whole DeFi liquidity. Essentially, we're aggregating all the DEX aggregators, DEXs, and liquidity networks between those chains, and then we have the ability to conduct complex multi-chain transactions to go from any long-tail asset on chain A to any other long-tail asset on chain B within one transaction. So any company that comes from top, any CDFI, any TradFi uses us to simply engage with this multi-chain environment without having to care about what they have to use down there. We do the research, integration, maintenance overhead, and that shortens the go-to-market for almost anything you can build on top of crypto.
Hey everyone, I'm Jake, co-founder, CTO of ThirdWeb. At ThirdWeb, we build developers tools to essentially make it easier for developers to build Web3 apps. And we provide wallet solutions, contract solutions, payment solutions, and infrastructures. Developers should be focusing on building what they want to build, decentralized internet products, and we make it happen cheaper, easier, faster. And we work with protocols and small businesses to Fortune 500 companies, providing solutions and providing dev tools to make it happen for them.
Great. So first, I don't want to assume that everyone here is completely familiar with the topic. So maybe to sort of level set and make sure everyone follows, what the current multi-chain landscape looks like. Jake, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how ThirdWeb looks at supporting different ecosystems throughout your services. What sort of complexities and considerations you have to think about, because you can't, be on every chain.
Yeah, like for us, obviously, in this ecosystem today, there are generally EVM and non-EVM chains. And for ThirdWeb, we have make sure that all of our solutions and tools that we provide work out of every EVM chains. So if you have public EVM blockchains or private EVM blockchains, our tool will just work out of the box. And obviously, there are still some challenges, right? Like liquidity, for example, is one challenge that comes to mind. When you have multiple different blockchains, how do you put money, liquidity on each of those blockchains? That remains a challenge that we have today. And interestingly, I think because more recently, I think there has been a tremendous growth and just, I would say, expansion of L2s that has happened. Increasingly more and more, there are people building L2 for a very specific use case, just because it's faster, it's cheaper, and obviously, they can control the experience. And we at ThirdWeb, facilitate some of those contract deployments and facilitate some of those developer tooling layer and helping them, onboard more developers to build on their network and their blockchain.
Cool. No, so kind of going off on, how do these blockchains all sort of talk to each other? We know that, these chains aren't sort of just silos that exist individually. So borrowing an analogy of blockchains are like cities, how bridges and tunnels can connect cities together. And, the idea is that by connecting these together, the sort of economic value that is created by kind of creating this interoperability makes for more activity than you'd see otherwise, just kind of adding them together. And so, Philip, I know that you and LeFi are very deeply involved in this space, kind of breaking from the analogy of bridges, like cities and governments build bridges, but in crypto, anyone can build a bridge, and that's good, but it also creates certain opportunities or challenges. So what are the complexities that LeFi sees, and then how do you try to make that easier for a developer or ultimately their end user?
So in general, yeah, this is a very complex problem. There is this so-called interoperability trilemma. So essentially, bridging solutions have to pay 2 out of 3 trade-offs. It is the question of generalizability, like what can you do with that bridge? Are we only talking asset transfer, or can you send any kind of instructions? So Wormhole, for example, is an AMB, an arbitrary data messaging bridge, where you can send all kinds of information across chains, and it's super powerful, right? At the same time, another thing is the topic of extensibility, like how easy is it for a system to expand towards another network. If I'm not wrong, Wormhole now sets on light clients down the line, which is not known for being the most extensible solution, but therefore one of the most trust minimized solution, which is like the third pillar, right? Generalizability, like what can we do with it? Trust minimization, whom do we have to trust? What would it cost to corrupt it? And then extensibility, how easy is it to expand? And so we have a bunch of players in this space on the lowest level, Axelar, Layer 0, Wormhole, Hyperlane, a few others, and they all pick different trade-offs. So that's the baseline for looking at interchain communication. On top of that, we have liquidity networks. These liquidity networks, they allow us to simply, as atomic as possible, move assets and value across chain. The problem is here, though, we have a capital efficiency problem. So all these liquidity networks, we are talking about roughly 50 different players, have chosen to start with a certain amount, like with specific assets or with certain source and destinations, trying to capture a certain market and corner that market for themselves. So all of that creates a huge hurdle for developers as well as end users, right? Instead of having to know which bridge do I have to use to get from A to B, Leafai's task was all right, let's simply aggregate all these solutions. And I just spoke about 2 types of bridges. There are more. If you talk about Circle CCTP, for example, we are one of the go-to-market partners here as well. So especially with larger transfers, when all these liquidity networks have been using USDC as like, it's a no-brainer to simply support USDC as a stable coin. So we had a great exposure to USDC from the get-go by aggregating these liquidity networks. But now Leafai is onboarding more and more institutionals, and as such, we have larger volume transfers, and at that point, we make use of CCTP to be able to mint and burn certain large volumes, right? So in the past, that was fairly limited. Keeping track of all these bridges was exhausting, and so lucky enough, CCP is around is here now, and that helps. But yeah, I could go on, but it's.
Okay. No, that's super helpful. I mean, just seeing Leafai integrated in a lot of apps, it really abstracts the problem away from the end user. They don't need to know, nor do they really care how they're getting to the destination. But if you're presenting to them like the cost, the gas cost, the time, and let them choose, it reminds me of kind of choosing the best flight that suits my itinerary when I go to like Google Flights. I think you guys make it a little bit more seamless, which is nice. So thank you for kind of helping on the developer experience and user experience side of that. So far we've talked about assets moving from chain A to chain B. That's a pretty simple use case. I want to move my own money to another chain. But in reality, and we hope that increasingly in the future, the needs of users and apps across chains isn't just about asset transfer, from person A to person A. It should span applications, it should span assets, it should be a much richer thing that they're trying to do across chain. And so Robinson, I think you guys especially are very focused on adding value on top of what might just be a primitive USDC transfer across chains. Someone's trying to do something a lot more complex. So if you could share with us a little bit about how you guys think about that, maybe what the current state is and where you think that's going.
Yeah, and maybe I'll back up a little bit too, and I like how Philip sees the stack. I think it's important to view it like that. So you have these arbitrary message passing providers. So this is a Wormhole in this instance. Our goal is to make it as easy as possible for other builders and developers to use what some people view as like a secure notary. Like we're a highly secure notary to say like what happened on this chain can be sent, and that state can be shared and happen on this chain as well. On top of that, we've built a token bridge as well. And I mentioned earlier, like a lot of people, when it comes to cross-chain, are very familiar with sending NFTs and tokens. For instance, I remember during the bull market, people, as the DeFi degens would say, they were yeeting punks and apes and everything cross-chain to different networks, which is things you can do. But all of that is done via messaging. So what's happening under the hood is usually have smart contract on chain A and assets maybe locked, they're burned, and then there's essentially a message verifying the fact that this happened, and then you can mint an asset on another chain. Builders have come to us, and in the past, let's say, year, what they've done is they're building their application and they're focusing on the users, which was what they should do. But they get to a point where they say, all right, I've built this application. I actually want to get liquidity on Solana. There's a lot of activity going on there. I want access to Solana. Or, I want some of the users that's happening on X, Y, and Z L2. And cross-chain has become kind of this afterthought. What we've been working on for a while and what we're starting to see builders move towards is actually like building the architecture of their protocol or their application from the ground up cross-chain. So using messaging to make a more simplified user experience. And I think Jeremy mentioned this earlier, which we resonate with a lot, is cross-chain is a way to abstract away a lot of this complex UX that we're not going to onboard new users with. And some examples of that today, I'll give two kind of applications that I think are built cross-chain from the ground up and getting meaningful, or one of them is getting meaningful adoption and one's about to launch. But Pyth, for those who aren't familiar, is an Oracle. A lot of people are familiar with Chainlink, which is definitely an incumbent in the space. But Pyth is what I call like a high-quality data oracle. So they are taking data from hedge funds and like Jane Street, for instance, like price feeds and things like that. They're putting that on a blockchain, and then they're using Wormhole's messaging to send that to 27 networks. And so what that's doing is, in a very secure and quick way, getting high-quality price feeds from hedge funds to DeFi protocols. So the price on synthetics, for instance, could be sourced from Jane Street. And all of that the entire protocol is predicated on the fact that Wormhole is secure, it's working, it's live, et cetera. And then we have another one, Pike, which is really interesting, is a cross-chain borrow lend. So when we think about borrow lends today, I don't know how many folks have used borrow lends recently, but there's a lot of liquidity fragmentation that happens. Like if you go on a borrow lend, you see all these assets, like Wormhole in some instances can be part of the problem here, but you see like USDC dot, and CCTV solves this, but like USDC.ET, you'll see X, Y, and Z. There's all these prefixes and suffixes, and it causes like a lot of fragmented liquidity. What we're seeing now with some of these new cross-chain borrow lends, which is really interesting, is that if I'm on another chain, I can deposit whatever asset I have on that other chain, and then a message is sent from that chain to, let's say, let's use an actual example. I'm on Optimism. I have OP. I have this native token. I can deposit it. There's a message that's sent that said I did that. It's secure. It's decentralized. Then it goes to Arbitrum, so I can borrow against this native asset, and I can get ARB on Arbitrum. So maybe a longer answer, but I think what's interesting is that users are used to tokens and NFTs, and you can't do any of that without messaging. But the new applications that we're starting to see that may hopefully make it up there with the likes of the Uniswaps and the Aves of the world are largely being built cross-chain from the core.
Cool. So all of that was sort of just an intro to make sure everyone's kind of on the same page right now. We've heard about the complexity that different chains brings. We've heard about the complexity and fragmentation that different bridges bring. We've heard about beyond just asset movement, how people want to do more complicated things. So it's a very complex problem. And before we kind of dive into how CCTP doesn't solve all of that, but tries to play its role in helping to kind of create like smoother liquidity here, I'll just kind of give a 1-minute blurb about CCTP for people who aren't necessarily as familiar with it as we are. So CCTP is Circle's cross-chain transfer protocol. It allows someone to burn USDC on a source chain, and then through our more centralized service, mint that on a destination chain. So if you imagine there's 12 plus chains that have native USDC today, 4 of those chains, ETH, AVAX, Optimism, Arbitrum, have CCTP there, which means that from any to any of those chains, you can burn, actually destroy, and then you can mint USDC on the other side. So unlike the liquidity type solutions you mentioned, it's more capital efficient. Unlike the sort of lock-in mint solutions that we've become comfortable with, there's less bridge risk. It's something that is just a few months old. We've seen it on 4 chains. We've seen 300+ million of value move across CCTP already. 4 chains is not where it stops. We plan to be on upwards of 8 chains plus by the end of the year and early next year. Ideally, we want everywhere there's USDC to be USDC that can be transported easily across all of our chains. So with that, I wanted to kind of open it up to the whole group. Like what made, when you guys heard about CCTP, what made it interesting to you guys, knowing that there were already liquidity-based bridges out there, knowing that there were lock and mint bridges out there? What made it interesting to you and your companies, and how did it allow you guys to do things differently?
I can go first. I think obviously for us at Third Web, we're building developer tools and we're interacting with a lot of developers and with different skills level, work for different companies. I think the nice thing about CCTP and the native USDC is that the standardization. I think that one thing we observed was like there are some tokens, even though it's bridge, it may lack some functionality or it may have additional functionality. And I think that lack of consistent interface and implementation creates some wrong expectation. When I interact with USDC on one chain, why is it different on the other chain, right? And I think that standardization is definitely helpful and simplify developer experience and makes it more streamlined for people to build. So they can go in with, oh, like this is how I can use it and get what they expect. And I think that's kind of one area I would say like developer experience, but I also think that user experience too. Just because, bridging traditionally takes a while for, assets to go from one place to the other. And I think with CCTP, it actually reduces the time that's needed for you to, lock up or freeze the asset on one chain and then get it on the other chain. And that reduces in withdrawal time, the delay, helps with developer experience and also user experience because now I can go and teleport to every chain in a very short amount of time. And I think that access of liquidity is really powerful because if you think about how, if we want to swipe a credit card and make a transaction, we almost expect like immediate confirmation, immediate response. And so I think like CCTP is definitely kind of brings us one step closer to kind of better UX and also developer experience as well.
Cool.
Yeah, I still remember the first day the rumor arrived that Circle is about to release a bridge, and everyone in the space was like, oh my god, they're gonna kill bridging. I was like, right, USDC is going to be the standard, they're going to kill bridging, but Circle did a really smart move. Instead of competing with existing liquidity networks who would have integrations with lots of dApps, they utilize and leverage these players to actually wrap Circle. So Circle could stay conservative when it comes to minting and burning, and liquidity networks still would build up liquidity pools around USDC to allow faster swapping, faster withdrawals, faster transfers, and only if there are very large volumes to be transferred, we actually have to mint and burn. So for us, it was an enabler. At the same time, existing liquidity networks still have a reason to exist. So that was good. But essentially, yeah, those are the big takeaways for us. The one you mentioned is standardization, still a big issue, right? Going to Avalanche or whatever, USDC-E is still around, so waiting for this to vanish, and at the same time, larger volumes enabled, and then yeah, smart move from Circle just to leverage existing players in the market.
Yeah, similar sentiment. When CCTP came out, we're like, oh no. But no, and I'll explain a little bit why it's like common misconception. It's actually more powerful together, Wormhole and Circle. But I think it's important to understand the world where we came from without CCTP. Wormhole's in a unique position. So if you are a chain, let's say you're monolithic L1, you have and you're launching, you don't have a bridge, you have no connection to the rest of DeFi. You are on an island, essentially. So Wormhole's in the habit, or is by, I guess, proximity, has launched a lot of chains. we launch with the chains. So I think a good example would be like an Aptos or a Sui that semi-recently launched. With these chains, USDC, when it arrives on these chains, based on the origin chain it came from, is different. So like thought exercise, let's say we go from a user goes from Ethereum, or a user goes from Solana, or any other chain that let's use BNB, goes from BNB. The USDC brought from Ethereum to Aptos is usually denominated as USDC.E or .ET. The USDC from BNB is usually denominated as USDC.BNB, and then it goes on and on for all the chains that USDC is native to. And there's really innovative ways of solving this, and I think LeFi obviously does a great job, especially with the liquidity layers. But at the end of the day, like Aptos is going to have a lot of these this fragmented liquidity. And when it comes to running these chains, you need as much going for you as possible, and having all this fragmented liquidity is really difficult. So CCTP solves that issue largely. So when you're going from two chains where CCTP is live, you can go from native USDC to another native USDC, and then that USDC is obviously fungible throughout the whole chain. You don't have to worry about there's still some rogue USDC.ETs out there and stuff like that. But largely in the future, you won't have to worry about, is this USDC, does this one originate from Solana, BNB? And it's a really, really bad user experience. So for Wormhole, the way in which we work with CCTP is that, it's largely a bridge, as we've mentioned. And we are able to send additional instructions along with each transfer. So if you think about, let's just use Avalanche and Ethereum, what's happening is that you're burning USDC on Avalanche and you're minting on Ethereum. So you're getting a native USDC that's fungible with the whole chain. What we do is we'll send extra set of instructions. So we'll send instructions along with that transfer that says, when you get to Ethereum, swap. And so what you're able to do is you can compose transactions, and then when you abstract that up to the user and what the user's looking at, you can do really cool things. So you could go from USDC native in one trade to Avalanche, the token, AVAX. And under the hood, USDC is kind of used as this highway for swapping. So I think I wanted to address yes, it's a bridge, but actually the two together are pretty complementary.
Yeah, no, just to kind of touch on a few things that you guys mentioned, I think thank you for those kind words about CCTP and USDC being a standard experience across different chains. That's completely our intention and by design. And just to kind of share with the crowd, we're not necessarily expecting CCTP to be integrated directly with every developer. Rather, it's through integrations like ThirdWeb, through integrations like LeFi. As we've talked to some wallets, for example, some self-custodial wallets, and we ask them about CCTP, and they ask, does LeFi support it? And we say yes. They're like, okay, then that makes my integration completely easy. So it's sort of through these partners, they've kind of gone to the depths of integrating with CCTP, not to make it sound difficult or anything. Hopefully it wasn't. But it's not intended to be reaching tens of thousands of developers directly. It's through other partners, through other integrations, that we want people to have access to it. And ultimately, the end user may or may not even have to see it. Like in your case, they might be touching two large assets like OP or ARB. They might be touching long tail assets, and they might not need to know that USDC was sort of the highway or the plumbing, however you want to sort of look at the analogy. And definitely sort of echo what you said, Robinson, about we approached you guys very early about CCTP, just wanting to gauge your view of it, knowing that from one perspective you could view it as we're kind of bumping up into the same space, but as you said, I think there's very specific things that Circle and we focus on, while making sure a lot of that really that fat layer of innovation on top is kind of best suited for you guys to sort of expand on and build on top of. So maybe let's take a couple minutes and share with the audience either existing use cases that you've seen through your integrations of CCTP, or if those are still sort of in its early stages, what are things that you imagine happening? We've touched on a few theoretical examples, but if we get a little more specific about things that would personally interest you.
I can say something. So I mean, we have around 120 integration partners, from wallets to custodians to payment solutions, especially payment solutions. And this is where I think this has the greatest impact, that people now can build payment solutions and they have an immediate stablecoin support. And you know, these payment solutions, well, all these startups in crypto, they start in different ecosystems, right? So depending on where they get their first grants from, so where are they going to settle their payments in the first place? That's always a question. So, and all these payment solutions now have one unified standard, no matter where they're at, which they can use to simply let people on-ramp into anything, and USDC is that rail in between, or it's just like that, yeah, cross-border payment solution to on-ramp into a stable way, because like you want to on-ramp into something stable, or off-ramp from something stable, otherwise you would be exposed to the volatility, right? And now you have a standard you can rely on, and that goes long ways.
I think for us, we have seen that USDC and I think CCTP enable a different way to interact with the blockchain. And I think particularly, with gas station that was announced, and also like, account abstractions, right? For the first time, like people can actually pay USDC or pay USD to transact on a blockchain. And the spec, obviously we're still pretty early in the development of that, but I think that's the promise. It's like, hey, like USDC is the standard currency that's used, stable currency that's used for interacting and paying transaction fees. So that's kind of how we've seen it, and I think there's definitely, this is just the beginning as to thinking about adoption for the blockchain, and we feel like at least USDC will be the backbone of almost how we think about gas and fees on a blockchain, because if you're dealing with the native currency, you have to deal with the volatility, you have to deal with like the network condition and whatnot. But I think with USDC, it removes like the volatility of the currency and only allow people to interact with a stable currency and only deal with like the network conditions. Okay? Something we talk about, like, hey, it's like gas, like how you pay gas, right? When you drive a car.
No, I appreciate, like both of you brought up that it removes, like using USDC to kind of move value between chains, even though it's not your like source asset you're caring about or your destination asset. It removes one question mark, one variable.
No, I was gonna say that was largely one of the things, but it's composing transactions, I think, in a more capital efficient way. Users don't want wrapped assets. Being in the business of, wrapped assets are created with Wormhole in some regards. Users don't want that. They want to get to native. Everything's native to native. If wrapped assets will largely happen under the hood, and we have liquidity layers and things like that, but CCTP helps you compose these transactions that are more capital efficient, less slippage. You're getting from one asset to another asset in the most efficient way, and it's native, and it's like the type of UX we want and will bring in new users with. I think that's like what I see as like the overarching really strong use case with CCTP. But I'm excited for the applications that we'll build with it, and I already alluded to the one. But these cross-chain borrow lends, we view blue chips in crypto as like they're here to stay and they will always be at the top. That could be the case. Uniswap could always be the top. Aave always be at the top. But I think with these cross-chain borrow lends, at least that we're seeing and we're working with, and I know Circle and they're utilizing Circle and CCTP in particular to provide like a better user experience and a more capital efficient borrow lending experience to ultimately give better rates. So when you're actually doing lots of volume over time, it will make more sense to the user and give better yield. But what that does is we finally have the infrastructure in place for these applications to build better products that can slowly start chipping away at the market share of some of the blue chips. So at least that's what we kind of think will happen for these like cross-chain native applications that are using Wormhole, that are using CCTP. So yeah, I think that's what we're excited for beyond composing really efficient transactions.
Yeah, I think one thing we haven't touched as much on is, and it kind of goes to some of the history pre-CCTP. If anyone here, is a Circle customer or has a Circle account, you probably know that, when you're a customer of Circle and you bring fiat, you get USDC. that USDC is shown to you in a sort of chain agnostic balance. So in your account, you just see USDC. You don't need to know that it's split across 15 chains. It's not relevant to you. At the point where you want to withdraw it, we'll ask you what chain do you want to withdraw to. So we've always had the concept of this sort of fluid movement between chains internally, and I was kind of just thinking to myself just now, it's like surprising that we came up with this as late as we did, because it's something we've offered in a centralized fashion to a lot of our partners for the longest time, and we've never really, not to say we haven't put ourselves in our users' shoes, but we've kind of gotten comfortable with our direct customers and how they don't have this friction. But then as you look on chain, like people have all sorts of friction about how to move USDC from one chain to another. Oftentimes people rely on centralized exchanges that might try to collapse that and make your balances, like on Coinbase, for example, you have a USDC balance. You don't have a USDC on Solana balance. You don't have a USDC on Avalanche balance. They kind of take a similar approach that we have and make USDC chain agnostic. And while bringing centralized exchange support to new USDCs is fantastic, it's not always something that every centralized exchange can keep up with us on. And so we've been thinking, as you can launch USDC on a new chain and have CCTP coming right behind it, for example, Arbitrum or Optimism, that helps people kind of diversify their options from having Coinbase or something as an option to move between chains, but also now they can kind of do it permissionlessly themselves. And so for us, it's a goal to try to ship CCTP as soon after USDC launches, because we know that for those early days before the top exchanges have kind of built support for it, it's a quick way for them to ramp up liquidity, ramp up users. Many of their users already hold USDC on other chains. So it helps bring that, on the Circle account side, we call it multi-chain USDC. Pretty generic name, but now it's sort of like giving that same value to everyone and anyone on chain. So with a couple minutes left, I want to see, are there ways that you guys think Circle could improve or expand CCTP? Are there things that it's missing today that could help you guys build more interesting products for your users and your developers, or is it just mostly about being in more places?
Yeah, I have an immediate thing. I think what we're going to see now or very soon is like an explosion of L3s. So with all these rollups as a service, there is a huge danger that it could become a mess again with lots of wrapped versions. You have to specifically index and track, and and then if there's one wrapped version, it's an easy go-to thing to create a second wrapped version, like by malicious people. So that's what I personally am afraid of. So I really hope we find a solution where we can make Circle's expansion more scalable, because otherwise you're gonna go back in time again.
I think I want to add on that, because just what we have seen more recently, where there's a new L2 launch every week, and we have also heard of app chains or L3 that's coming up, and so I think speed to launch, the speed to market is really important, and so finding ways to kind of do it in a more scalable way and permissionless way, maybe, right, of like bringing this technology to every chain. I think that, like you said, it's like we don't want to go back to where we were, and how do we move forward from here? I think speed is crucial.
I want to add to this, like you also have to consider like USDC is for new ecosystems such an enabler. If you think about that, all these on-ramps and off-ramps, now that there is the standard like established, now that everyone on-ramps that way or off-ramps that way, like you have become not only a stable coin, but you have become an enabler for businesses, especially for these app chains, and we want them to thrive, right? Because like my own app roll-up is a chance for me to accrue more value or to provide faster transaction fees and provide a more seamless user experience. So there are many reasons why people have their own forks or whatever. Now we need a way to, you have to understand that Circle has become an enabler for so many businesses, and yeah, so we have to solve that.
Yeah, I guess just to emphasize how important this is, we'll all three can focus on it. We think a lot about this a lot at Wormhole too. There is a lot of chains popping up fast. We probably talk to 10 a week at this point, which seems unrealistic, but I promise you it's true. And I think there is when and you talked a little bit about the trilemma, like the more decentralized you are in general, I think it's harder to go fast and connect to a lot of chains. Wormhole has to spin up 19 full nodes. We have 19 different validators that will test every transaction and send that to the next chain, and it takes time. And so I think in general, there's like this need for how do we connect all of these up and coming chains quickly, like in general, fundamentally for bridging. And then for CCTP, to your point, USDC is so important for the success of just like ETH. ETH is so important for the success of a given chain. I think the answer I would say is just like, how can you make expansion quicker, or how can you make expansion as permissionless as possible? Like obviously it's probably very difficult, and we understand that as well. Like we would love to make it more permissionless, but and giving more power to developers to maybe like prioritize CCTP as a plan in their plan to launch a chain, I think would help us solve a lot of these potential worrisome fragmentation issues on the horizon, just as we were fixing them.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because like, I mean, just for the audience, like chatting with these guys today, like this topic came up very organically in each of our conversations as like one of the biggest things we're thinking about. It's something we're thinking about, as we look to next year. We know we probably cannot issue natively on hundreds of chains. At the same time, I don't think that's what the market wants necessarily. These stacks or these ecosystems are kind of rushing to find solutions, similar to how maybe Cosmos or Polkadot are a little bit ahead, just because they've kind of been thinking about that app chain thesis longer. We'll be working closely with these, stack teams. We'll also be working closely with you guys, to keep the progress coming and not take too many steps backward on the way there. So we're at time, I think, but hopefully this conversation has been helpful to all of you. Hopefully the initial part got you up to speed if you weren't already there. And I want to thank my panelists for joining me on stage today. Thank you.
Thank you.